Now, here's where we can kind of bridge some of the gaps, because we've talked about, what did the additional income mean? We saw what it did for disposable income, but how is it designated? How is it broken up? And we've shown different versions of this chart, some that we've made, some that we found that we thought were very good. This is another great one. Where you can just see the level of tax rebates, how that really kind of permeated throughout the system, just given delays of receiving it, smaller checks being given out at different points in time, the additional $600 a week, and just what that meant for total income growth, and how that, as that's really fallen off, and without that additional consumption, or I should say income, consumption will change. And that's when we've seen that. We've shown chart after chart, data point after data point, how that is truly coming to pass, how we're really seeing this big slowdown, which is why fiscal stimulus is being watched so closely, specifically in the US markets, where it moves us, 50 handles or 1.2% on a regular basis, just given the uncertainty. And unfortunately, and this is like the running joke, it's, if you don't have real economic growth, then this is just something quick to pass. And as you saw, it came and left just as quickly, and that's the bigger issue. It's not really that staying power that we need. So it's like giving the druggie its fix. It's like, and my running joke is, at this point, we've just given them keys to the lab and said, have it, it's all yours, it's free, because we're now on this negative trajectory of just monetary stimulus, fiscal stimulus, give me more. And there's only so much that can be tolerated, unless MMT is right and I'm crazy, and we can just take money irregardless of anything. But I like to think that I am correct, because if I'm not, I will be having a bonfire. I'll be hosting it in December, where I will take all of my finance and econ books and just light them on fire, because I give up. So, when we look at household spending, this is just a different way of kind of breaking it down, because the first chart really looks at how did you get that additional money? And this is looking at what did you do with the additional capital, with the additional income. And here you can see in April and May, a lot of it went into savings, which is good to see in terms of people storing up. It was the concern for jobs, what is going to happen? Let's squirrel this away so that we can have a base to build off of. Obviously taxes, though, my wife was very astute in saying, when I explained to her what the Fed was doing in March, if the Fed can do this, if the ECB can do this, why do we pay taxes? Here, services became a bigger purchase, and that has whittled off. But it's that's started to stay a little bit healthier into August and September. It started to slow, but the durable goods was one that we saw holding relatively firm, but that will start to tail off as well as the additional income falls away. Now, when you think about, okay, well, people had a different income, people were trying different things. Well, how did shopping change? What did people do with the capital? And then what are people going to do with the capital going forward? Because this is the first time where you were forced to change your ways. You were forced to change your consumption patterns, where you couldn't go shop in store. You had to rely online. You had to do more on the e-commerce side. Now, the one thing I always like to highlight is the U.S. Post Office comes to your door, whether or not you have mail, whether or not you have a package, you're on their route. FedEx and UPS, same thing. You're on their route. If you have a package getting delivered, their route just got more efficient because they can do more stops. So you can argue, well, it's a little bit more gasoline or diesel demand, depending on what they run on. But the bigger issue here is it's less gasoline consumption. You are not going to the store. You are not going to Target 2 or 3 times a week. You're not going to the food store 2 times a week. You may be going once or, every other week, and you're relying online for others. And that is becoming a common part of the way people consume and the way people are driving. And this is why we continue to look at what is gasoline demand going to do? What is diesel demand going to do? And when you consider 2019 versus 2020, the entirely in-person has come down. Mostly in-person has come down. Both in person and online, and mostly online, I think those two segments are going to continue to get some love, especially the both in person, because you're going to have individuals that want to get in the stores, see what it looks like in person, maybe try something on. But if it's a Barbie dollhouse, I know what that is. I know what that looks like. I can buy that off of Amazon. If it's something for your kids, it's something that maybe You buy, like I know for myself, I buy the same sneakers, same brand, same size. So do I really need to go try on 7 different types if I know they're just going to be knockarounds? No, I'm going to buy it online because now, and then companies are giving you incentives, free shipping, free this, buy one, get one. So those are things that are getting more and more, and that entirely online is gonna be shifting. So I don't think it's gonna take the mostly online, but it's gonna get both in person and online down into mostly online, and you're gonna get this adoption rate. And we're past the early adopters. Now we're getting into the meat of the shift, and it was forced upon us by COVID, and now it's being adopted as a more efficient way of doing business. Now the other side of the equation is you have those in the urban setting who have now moved to the suburban urban setting. They still rely on, and their spending patterns were already shaped by their urban setting, which was online purchasing, and that is going to carry over. And as more people take up homes in some of these areas that are getting built up on both suburban and rural, it also makes those supply lines more efficient. Again, changing the way people are consuming, changing the way people are spending, and then not planning on any holiday shopping. Sadly, that will most likely start to increase, especially as there is fear or there is a problem as you consider where are the jobs coming from. And then when we look at jobs, we have to look at percent change in industry, because now we've talked about people are also changing the way they're purchasing online. So do you need bricks and mortar? Do you need it in the same way? Do you need the same footprint? Cisco was out recently saying that they are seeing the overall footprint of corporations shrinking. They just don't need as much space because people are now going more remote. There's more blended work hours, which again is becoming a much bigger issue. And then if you look at just where there has been contraction and growth, you can see that we still haven't regained and we still haven't gotten back to that growth level. We still have a net negative, but it's not universal. Like there are some periods where obviously food and beverage, warehousing, couriers and messengers, super centers and warehouse clubs, those have all seen growth in terms of just hiring, and just consider the way people are consuming. Again, coming back to consumers, allowing companies to optimize their supply chain by just going direct to their doors, which again is going to be, you'll see that continue to grow, especially as we go into the holiday season, where I think Amazon has talked about hiring an additional 100,000 people to man the different centers. Again, the other places are going to continue to struggle: childcare, temporary services, mining, logging, state and local government, education, and state and local government jobs are going to be a big one, especially when we consider just how much the municipalities are going to struggle. So this is going to be a big problem, and this is why we continue to see additional headwinds in the jobs market. And this is where we start to, again, looking at total construction, because we saw a construction spike on essentially across the board, specifically on the residential side, as we had people going out, buying homes, building new homes, buying homes, which is then getting people to build more. That is still remaining very robust. The bigger problem is non-residential. We saw it really slow down. We saw a little bit of an uptick, but now we're back into a net negative cycle. Now, given there's a certain amount of seasonality in terms of there's always a slowdown as things get a little bit colder. But again, this is some of those headwinds as we look at durable goods. We look at additional activity, which is going to continue to be a little bit more of a headwind as we look at the overall economy, when we look at investment and spending, as we think about what makes up that GDP number. And when we look at that spending, it's always going to come down to, well, where is the volume going to come from? Are we going to get a surge in volume? And this was an interesting data point from the FHA, or the Federal Homes Agency. When you look at the delinquency rates through August 31st, which we know from previous data points and charts that we've shown, it's only gotten worse through September, that we continue to see total delinquent loans increasing to an all-time high, where we have on total U.S. about 17.4%. And again, these are just some key areas that were called out as big problem spots, where we're almost well above 20% in terms of total delinquency. Seriously delinquent loans, again, we're starting to see that shift where they're going from just delinquent to seriously delinquent, which is measured over 90 days or more. And now with the extension of no evictions, that's going to be relatively sticky. And we're going to continue to see that gain momentum where you get more seriously delinquent loans, which will be overall a problem when you consider, well, how quickly do we get back to normal? And then as these new homes come online, well, are we going to have short sales? Are we going to get all of a sudden this flood of supply, which is going to hit some of this price increases that we've seen, which I think is likely? The question is going to be just timing. When is that going to happen? When are we going to see this merge? Or do we see the delinquency rates getting kicked to the right? Do we see some of the permitting that will stay permits but won't be turned into construction because they want to see how the market looks? Or maybe those permits failed to get financing, or financing was cut, which will limit the new builds. Again, these are things to watch, especially as we go into 2021, when technically some of these individuals will face foreclosures and will face proceedings where they will be forced out of their homes. And when you think about being forced out of homes, when you think about what's happening at the municipal level, from small businesses to consumers paying taxes or tax revenue being generated, this is a look at tax revenue losses in the U.S. state and local tax revenue. And you can see that we are hitting record amounts in terms of just the amount of tax revenue lost. And it's individual income taxes, and it's obviously people who don't have the income that they have, or they're not spending the same way, which comes down to sales and gross receipts tax. Those two components will remain massive, and it's very hard to see that really adjusting as incomes are shaved and or incomes are reduced. And then as people don't have that income, they're just not going to spend as much, which again is just reverberating out. And then as you have corporations that are shuttering in terms of bankruptcies going through, small businesses shutting down, that's going to decrease the corporate income tax. Again, these are things that are not going to quickly adjust, just because these are overhangs that were starting. If you go back to 2019, you can see kind of the trend was starting to go lower and lower, and people's incomes were adjusting. You started to see some upheavals in the beginning of 2019, and again, these are going to be consistent themes, which is why when you look at municipalities and just how are they going to finance themselves, it's going to be difficult, and I think you're going to see a lot of stress coming into some of these balance sheets. And when we look at change in number of small businesses open, this is where, again, not everyone is hit the same. You can see the coastal guys and some in the Midwest have been hit the hardest in terms of just the percentage of small businesses opening. And the change is just continuing. But we are starting to see some breath of life. We're starting to see some guys that are starting to streamline. They're outsourcing HR. Paychex had some great data points in terms of some new hiring, new people utilizing their system. The question is going to be, is it new, straight up new, where they're brand new businesses, or they're businesses that are just trying to cut costs, maybe letting go some of their HR departments, letting go some of their personnel and trying to outsource more to reduce cost. All of these things are very doable. So I would like to dig into those numbers a little bit. And I saw some of the headlines. This may have been covered in the interview. It's going to be worth watching. I will be watching it after this, just to get an idea of, well, what is that growth? Because right now the numbers still remain problematic when we consider new employment, new tax revenue, and just general growth. And when we consider the duration of where people are struggling, we continue to see that the distribution of unemployment by duration is at now actually averaging 17.8 weeks. So we're now firmly in that 15 to 26 weeks, and we continue to see that 27-week continue to grow. Now, we showed this last week. I just wanted to highlight it in terms of just where things are shifting as we look at sidelined longer, where we're getting the medium duration of unemployment at 17.8 weeks, which is back to 2012 levels. Again, the trajectory continues to shift higher, which we will take out. I think we will probably get to those 2008, 2009 levels, just given the sheer size of the slowdown. And even as we start to reopen the economy, it's just we don't have that reaction. We don't have that capital flow because, again, COVID was more of a jet fuel on a forest fire, where a lot of these cracks were looming into 2019 that only accelerated through that year, which is going to become a bigger problem. And as we look at just those metro areas, so not only did we talk about the FHA, which are already some of the riskier loans, now we can turn to what are tenants doing? What are non-paying apartment tenants? And you can see the increase. Las Vegas is the leader. And again, this is in September. So as we talked about, the FHA is looking at up until August 31st, and now this is picking up into September, which is why that data continues to worsen when we look at just people that are in arrears on, and not only just in mortgages but also in rent. Which, and if you think about, well, what are the landlords use the rent for? Is it spending? Is it the mortgage? Is it just maintaining the facilities? This all has a reverberating effect for those that think that they should no longer be paying rent ever again in their lives. That's not how this works. Like there is a chain for that dollar that continues to move up and down, and it can't just go away. Somebody's going to have to take that loss. Somebody's going to have to eat that hit. And you could say, well, the Fed can just print it, which, I mean, at this point, why not? But, we like to think that, economic theory and financial backdrop will outweigh. But again, these are bigger issues as we start to go in, because it's not just mortgages, it's also that rent side. And this was an interesting data point. It was from the same website as which is the Opportunity Insights, which comes back to the pretty picture of the U.S. And this is one looking at just small business revenue from the leisure and hospitality side. Again, the overhang is real. It's not adjusting anytime soon, and we are getting a resurgence of COVID, which will, and by resurgence, it's cases are rising, and not that they're going to rise and cause another lockdown, another big problem, huge amount of deaths. It's just people aren't going to stay out. Like, why would you risk it and go to a hotel, which again is going to be that overhang? So not only are you just going to avoid unnecessary exposure, you may not have the capital, or you may want to be cutting back on just those expenditures, which is going to be a huge overhang, especially as we look at some of these resort areas or some of these other cities that rely on this tax revenue. Because if you look at your hotel bill, there are a lot of taxes paid in that hotel bill, which isn't going to come through, which is going to hit some of the big urban areas as well, which is something that we're going to talk about in a little bit more depth at the beginning of the next segment. But we're going to go deeper into some of the German and Chinese data and kind of what is driving it and why we have some concerns, especially as we go through the remainder of 2021.